Well, happy Monday, everyone. We want to welcome everybody to NAMI at noon. I'm Amy Brundle. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at NAMI North Carolina. And as always, we're pleased to see everyone for this webinar session. First of all, as always, we'd like to thank the North Carolina Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services for their constant support of today's webinar and all of our educational programming. A couple of housekeeping items while we're having our conversation today. If you have any questions for today's speaker, please put them in the Q&A section down below or in the chat, and we will answer them probably once towards the middle of the conversation and then once towards the end as we have time. We'll be sending out any materials that the speaker provides for us, including the recording of this session later on in the week. And now I want to introduce today's speaker, Melissa Rodriguez. She's a licensed clinical mental health counselor in North Carolina and a national certified counselor. She completed her advanced education in health clinical psychology and mental health counseling in both Spain and the US. She's got over 15 years of experience working in education, clinical mental health counseling, and talking about issues like trauma, grief, life transitions, immigration stresses, depression, anxiety, chronic illness, and addiction. Melissa was diagnosed with diabetes type 1 during childhood, which sparked a lifelong interest in learning about the effects of chronic illness in the individual's mental health. She's also got extensive experience counseling Hispanic and Indigenous communities and their families. Welcome, Melissa. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very excited.
I want to make sure that I have fully enabled. Yes. Okay. Wait. I've fully enabled the chat. Okay, so feel free to use that as we're talking. Um, so we're going to talk today about how chronic physical illnesses and mental illnesses can impact each other, how they are kind of cyclically related. And so I want to start today's conversation with just a kind of a blanket description of what constitutes a chronic illness.
Um, I'm going to use the most basic definitions because I think even within the experts in the field, sometimes they vary under definitions. So the CDC and most organizations that are um, related to specifically the physical health or the physical realm, categorize the chronic illness as a medical condition that affects your functioning and it lasts more than a year. So anything that lasts more than a year is the most standard definition. And I also want to note that it might vary from provider to provider or depending on the therapeutic approaches that the person uses.
Okay. So it that's a pretty wide category of illnesses then. Can you give us a just kind of a description of like some specific illnesses that might fit under this category?
Absolutely. So I'm just gonna give you the greatest hits, right?
Hmm.
When it comes to medical conditions, people usually associate when people mention, it's very interesting when people mention chronic illness, they automatically think about chronic pain.
Hmm.
Right. It's like they go interchangeably. And chronic pain is a piece of it for sure. However, chronic illnesses can also be heart disease, can also be diabetes, can be cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, um, anything that can affect your functionality on a regular basis and even possibly lead you to death, right?
Hmm.
So those are the pieces that are ongoing, and what makes it very um, difficult for most of individuals struggling with a chronic illness is that it's hard to see an end to that, right? We wish we could say, okay, we're going to give you this treatment, and then you're going to get better, right? The chronicity of of a diagnosis, right, affects every piece um of yourself, right? From who you think you are as a person to the way you relate to others, to the way you think about yourself. And I'll go more in detail on that in a second. But that's the reason it's so impactful. On top of the financial repercussions, especially here in the United States, where the accessibility sometimes can be very challenging due to the financial burden that that can cause for the person and their families.
Right. So, I mean, you alluded to this a little bit, but what effects can having a chronic illness, especially in year two, three, five, 10, start to, what kind of toll can that start to take on your mental health? What kind of impact does that have?
Whew. I'm going to start with the brain a lot. I'm going to talk a lot about the brain today. Um, well, first off, the brain knows that your body is in danger, right? Um, your amygdala, I'm going to make a lot of references to The Body Keeps the Score because it's a mainstream book by Vanceville by Kolk, who did extensive studies of the impact of the brain and the body and how those two are connected. So I'm going to make a lot of reference on that, but I'm also going to make reference to other modalities and people who have done research on it. Well, first off, your amygdala goes and we have a crisis. There's something wrong here, and the alarm doesn't go off. Imagine that you are cooking and the the smoke started coming up and the alarm keeps doing the noise.
Mhm.
How do you feel after 5 minutes of that fire alarm going on?
Hmm.
That is your brain in a chronic illness, right? And it differs from condition to condition. But that those early stages, it's a constant sense of alertness because you're still trying to figure out when you're first diagnosed, like, what does this mean? My back is hurting. What does this mean? I feel dizzy. Am I gonna pass out? Does this mean that I'm gonna go in a coma, right? So you're always in this life-threatening sensation, even though for some conditions it could be, but for others not necessarily, is the message. So the brain goes in that alertness. So that usually increases your anxiety levels, increases your you feel exhausted. It's
Hmm.
tiring. And it also creates a sense of burnout, right? Because you say, well, what now, right? What happens to my hope, right?
Hmm.
Which I would like to talk more in detail later. But that's just for starter. Also, the toll on someone it gets exacerbated when you see that you cannot do the same things that you used to do before.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to use the example of chronic pain, right? Or fibromyalgia, which is also it's been getting more attention in the past 20 years. Um, I don't know where my pain is coming from, but I just know that my hands are hurting and my legs are hurting. And my children have this birthday party and at the park and they want to walk there and I cannot do that,
Hmm.
right? And then the children feel resentful towards me because I cannot take my children there, right? Um, and then the other moms that are waiting for the children also get upset because you said you were coming, right? So the social impact, and I'm talking about this in a very superficial level now, right? It pushes you to levels of isolation that are drastically impactful to your mental health. We as humans thrive with connection. So what chronic illness does is pretty much disconnect you not only from yourself, because if I disconnect from the sensations in my body, that dissociation of kind of sort of dissociation, I don't want to call it just like that. Um, it's helpful at the moment, right?
Hmm.
I don't feel the pain anymore because I don't think about it. I'm cutting it off. However, when it comes to connecting with all the other feelings, right, it makes it very challenging because, and I'm gonna quote Brene Brown on this one, that is very accessible psychoeducation on vulnerability and an emotion education is the fact that all the emotions are in one piece, right? We cannot pick and choose which emotions. Once we go into the emotion station, we feel all those, including the what we call the good ones and the bad ones. But we in chronic illness, we try to shy away from that. Emotions just are, right? And but then it's very hard to go there, right? It's very hard because we want to call them like, oh, I don't want to feel anger, or I don't want to feel pain, or I want to feel scared, or what's next. Um, I'm making sense so far.
Mm,
Yes, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and so that sense of disconnection with your social relationships, it also affects your work capacity, right?
Hmm.
I cannot be working long hours after 8, and my boss is upset because I didn't complete this, but I just had a low sugar episode. And I'm reading and reading the document, and I have to read it again and I read it again because I'm not retaining what I'm reading. So something that might take me, I don't know, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, it might take 2 hours, right?
Hmm.
So is that exhaustion also that you have to prove yourself to others on a regular basis in order to feel valued and in order to feel that your life really matters, that you're doing a contribution um in life, right?
Yeah.
So the part of the shame and guilt leads to in very significant levels of anxiety, of depression for many individuals. Um, and and the sense of not finding it makes it very difficult to find pockets of peace because the monitoring with your body is ongoing.
Hmm.
Like you don't have sometimes I make the joke that my diabetes is my full-time job. It's my 24/7. Um, because I was diagnosed at 11, so this is all I know. So
Hmm.
monitoring my body, body checking, it's second nature to me, right? And someone with a similar experience, diabetes is a well-known chronic disease, right? And that's the reason I'm trying to use the ones that are more common. But if someone has suggestions of other illnesses, feel free to bring it up. Um, it makes you to be walking on eggshells. Um, so, and I'm gonna go into this once I talk about family members a little bit more, but it's like someone explaining being in a relationship with someone, and they say, "Well, I don't know if I want to be with this person or not because I feel like I'm walking on eggshells all the time."
Hmm.
That's what a chronic condition is for someone with that type of diagnosis. Um, yeah, that's you know part of that piece. Um, we also have the pieces of related to the mental health providers and and how sometimes individuals don't feel seen by the healthcare providers. There's some research that I saw recently where 15% of medical providers, and this is kind of, it made me cringe a little bit when I read it, I'm going to be honest. So 15% of medical providers enjoy working with individuals with chronic illness.
Oh.
What happens to the other percent,
Hmm.
right? Because and I'm trying to see both sides of the story, right? Because those who are struggling with the diagnosis or the condition um want some answers, right? That's so frustrating to not have answers. And if we take an empathetic standpoint, medical providers also want answers for you. That's the reason they did all that studying and all that, right? Because they want to help us, they want to heal us. Um, and when it becomes chronic, it's frustrating for both sides too. Like they don't have the answers. You keep coming to the doctor's office, especially for arthritis, right? Now I'm hurting in my leg. Wait, last time it was my my leg, and now
Hmm.
hurting on my back. I thought I had this all figured out. And there's no moment where we're figuring this out, right? We have to set new tests. So that exhaustion also tricks some, I mean, ticks something on healthcare providers at the point that they lose sensitivity sometimes to it. And I'm talking very general, especially if there's any healthcare providers here. Um, and and it also um it, it creates that same compassion fatigue that sometimes clinicians like mental health providers can have. We talk about that fatigue a lot and that burnout a
Hmm.
lot. Like, oh, I went to a therapist and the therapist was like eating lunch and just not caring about what I was saying. I mean, the same can happen. We're all humans here.
Hmm.
So the idea of having this conversation for me, it's trying to close that bridge between providers and us. How do we can communicate um, to medical providers in a way that, hey, I can see how this is stressful for you. It's stressful for me. How we can find more alternatives. And this is the piece that for me is very, very important. Especially when we're talking about, oh, I gave you this labs and I already told you that you're okay. Like it happens a lot with some thyroid conditions, right? Like thyroid looks, everything's good, but then
Hmm.
there's no further testing, right? To stay curious, right? Yourself as someone with the diagnosis, but also encourage your healthcare provider to stay curious. And if they're not curious with you, then we need to talk. We need
Yeah.
to have a talk. And we need to start looking for other options for our own sake as well, right? The same, um, yeah, with something we do with any kind of relationship, with friendships, family members, romantic relationships, right? If this is not, we have a relationship with our providers. They are in care of the most important thing for us, which is our health,
Hmm.
that help us stay going on and staying alive. So it's important to have that. So, and at the same time, we have a system where we only have 10 minutes to talk to a provider.
Yeah.
How can we build rapport like that, right? So that will be bigger questions, and there will be like three more webinars, but
Right.
uh, I'm not gonna go there. But what we do know this, right? The more we feel valuable in life, um, the more effort we add into the way we care about ourselves and others, right? When other people help us get out of our emotion mind, when we are in places of distress and pain, there's plenty of research that says, that connection is helpful. Does not cure the person,
Right.
and at the same time is helpful. It's at the point that, for example, in diabetics, it's proven that diabetics, when they already have depression or they develop depression after diabetic, especially type 1s, right? Because there's different types of diabetes, and there's a lot of shame in diabetes. Why you had diabetes? You ate a lot of candy when you were a kid. Um, Not for type 1s, right?
Hmm.
The cause for type 1s, it's 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 still up in the air, but mainly a mutation in the pancreas, a virus that happened at one point and it mutated and affected the insulin secretion, and here we are having this conversation, and we're still trying to figure it out. Um, so 46% have a higher rate of mortality when they have depression.
Yeah.
Imagine when you were very sad and unable to do your basic um um daily functions because you were depressed because of grieving or a breakup, right? Brushing your teeth was a task. Eating was a task.
Hmm.
When you have insulin issues and you're not eating, you're going to have sugar crashes.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like a cycle that a lot of people um don't take under consideration in general. Um, so it's very complex.
Yeah.
And I also want to add, because it's something that I also saw, is the part of the addiction, right? Especially for individuals struggling with chronic pain.
Mhm.
Chronic pain, you just want a, a space of relief, right? And sometimes one of the things that we go into is, well, this feels like death to me. I'm not the person that I was before. I don't know who I am anymore. And it goes into a lot of either self-medicating, especially when medical providers think, oh, I'm not going to give you more pain medication because you're trying to get attention.
Mhm. That was one of our questions from the audience, actually, is
Oh, really?
about providers automatically kind of seeing people as pill seeking, and that in itself is a very complex conversation, and
Mhm.
unfortunately one that's been abused by people who are doing exactly that. So
Yeah.
kind of how do you walk that line between feeling like you almost need to prove yourself, but also trying not to self-medicate, but yet you're in this state all the time
Mhm.
of pain and discomfort and limited function.
Yes, yes. And this is the reason I was so excited about this space today, because it takes a village, right? How many of us, or if you have a family member, ask yourself this question, how many of us, after a chronic diagnosis, we've been referred to a mental health provider? I certainly wasn't.
Mm-mm. Same.
Um, so that's the first question, right?
Mhm.
What kind of tools we had to deal with our emotions? Because with pain comes an emotion.
Mhm.
We cannot separate those. Addiction, it's me trying to feel connected. But how can I feel connected to my body and others when I have so much pain?
Mhm.
I want to disconnect, but only for a little bit, not all the time. And that's where this cycle becomes so dangerous, and it requires a multidisciplinary team to help someone avoid getting into these patterns of self-medication. So that's a wonderful question. I see another one here. Um, Ah, yes. That one, it's the epilepsy, and can you read the question,
Oh,
Amy,
sure.
please?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on working with someone
Um,
with epilepsy as a mental health provider?
mhm. Epilepsy, it's pretty interesting because I see some pieces of epilepsy in trauma work, right? My specialization is in trauma, and I see a lot of individuals with an epilepsy diagnosis who um doctors they sometimes they go to the doctor and they say, oh, what you have, it's been triggered by stress, right? And yes, for sure, there's many um brain movements that
Mhm.
happen in the brain that can trigger an epileptic episode. And at the same time, the medicine the medical system doesn't have all the medication systems align, right?
Mhm.
People talk a lot about using alternative medication for epilepsy due to the lack of answers when it comes to what's going on in the brain that it's causing this extra activity, or lack of activity, right? Or this shutdown of the brain. Um, so I see how they can get very minimized on this specific. So having a stress plan for those patients with this kind of diagnosis that goes beyond the just traditional treatment is going to be very important. The first
Mhm.
thing that I tell someone with a epilepsy diagnosis, go to a mental health provider who specializes in chronic illness, specifically this, and also stay curious in what it's new in the market. I'm not a medical provider to go deep into what's the medical pieces of it, but I do know the benefit of acknowledging the limitations and the fear, right? Because, oh, I'm not going to do this because I'm afraid that I'm going to have an episode,
Hmm.
what I'm going to do, right? And the fear for the parents, if, oh, I don't want to leave my child alone because I don't know when they're going to have an episode, right? So to do a plan, what are we going to do when we have an episode? What's going to be our safety plan um, for an episode? Or how can I track my symptoms before it happens? Which is a double-edged sword because I'll say this and I'll close it for the next question. It's a double-edged sword because sometimes tracking your body all the time can be more anxiety inducing than
Hmm.
beneficial, right? However, for someone with diabetes like me, tracking is what keeps me alive.
Yeah.
Right? If I ignore my symptoms, like, oh, I feel a little bit, I snap at someone, my humor change, I feel kind of dizzy, or I cannot read well, my sugar is going low. And if I don't look for something, it's life-threatening.
Hmm.
So for someone with epilepsy, it might create more anxiety, it might increase distress. So it's a very it's a individualized plan. And this is something we have to keep in mind. Doctors know how to treat us as a macro. So this is where we go into knowing as much as we can about the condition so we can go into the micro pieces of it.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if that answered the question, but I hope I did.
And I think it's also kind of important to realize that just as having a chronic physical illness can make your mental health worse, mental
Hmm.
health symptoms can also exacerbate your physical illness.
Oh yeah.
So, as a chronic pain patient, I always heard like depression makes your body hurt, which makes you more depressed, which makes your body hurt, which makes you more depressed. And so it's this circle that you kind of have to figure out a way to
Hmm.
uh, interfere in to make sure that it doesn't keep spiraling on itself.
Yes. Yes. I agree. In one piece that it's very um interesting to me. It's talking about the grief in the diagnosis, right? No one says when we're diagnosed, you're not gonna be the same person. Um, the first step before we go into all the tasks of you need to do this, this, and this, right? One, two, three, four, is take your time, be sad, be angry, be 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 in that
Hmm.
space of the person for a while, right? The trick about grief is that we cannot force it, right? We have to just speak it to say, okay, at one point I'm going to grieve this. And when we're ready to start feeling that, we'll go there. And once we start grieving, we're able to go into the task pieces of the
Hmm.
condition.
And I would imagine that that all of this is more difficult if you're, say, younger than 35 or so, and receiving this diagnosis. There's an added layer of grief to that in some capacity, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Grief of the things that I thought I was going to do and now I cannot do,
Hmm.
right? Grief of, especially for teenagers. I'm not like the others. I have these devices on me. I'm different. When you're a teenager, all you want is to be the same as the others, and merge. Even as adults, we don't want to feel as different because when we are different, that means that we're not as connected. So
Hmm.
that's the reason I started the conversation with we want to be connected. This is what we aim for as humans. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about how, physical health and mental health are intertwined. I was wondering if you could expound just a little bit on trauma and kind of the physical symptoms that trauma can leave behind.
There's and this is for those who are curious and want to know more about it. It's called the ACE study. There's a big TED Talk on that from several years ago that explains all the details of the TED of the ACE study. But it's pretty much a study in the adverse circumstances or experiences that children have, right? And children who were abused physically, sexually, were neglected as children, it was proven that throughout their life Pam, they started developing physical illness, right? Like heart disease, cancer, chronic mental health conditions like bipolar disorder, borderline, schizophrenia, right? So all of these illnesses are deeply connected. And there's one piece of trauma that I don't think it's talked about a lot because trauma, it's not the event itself. Trauma is how your body stores that information.
Mm-hmm.
It's how you receive that information, right? So someone says, "Oh, Melissa, you survived how many hurricanes?" I'm originally from Puerto Rico, so how many hurricanes you survived? Like, I lost count, right? And they will be like, "I will be so traumatized by that," right? Which is absolutely valid, right? Trauma, it's how you process that. For me, it wasn't. I have other events that were traumatizing um, for me. And and the same with the effects of trauma in the body, right? When emotions are not recognized, right? When experiences are not recognized, it makes your brain believe that whatever was happening that time that you thought you were in danger, that time that you thought no one loved you and you were cast out, it's still happening. Trauma means your past is your present, right? So physically, that creates a toll, right? Cortisol levels. I know there's a lot of talk on cortisol on TikTok and everywhere, right? And how that affects our mental states, right? Because it puts us in a position that when there's something dangerous that we need to take care of, it's extremely helpful. But when the cortisol still's up, right, and the adrenaline is still up, when the danger it's already gone, right? Um, what that does is it shuts down. I always compare it to a phone when I'm talking to clients about it. Right, here's my phone. And if you ever left your phone in the sun for an extended period of time, you know what's going to happen, right? It's going to shut down,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what our body does, right? We've been exposing this body to physical abuse, to ongoing, it's having a bear inside your room. You know that your life is in danger, or either way, the sensation that your life is in danger is all that you need because this is what happens a lot with chronic pain, just to go into the trauma in the body, right? The time where I felt an extreme amount of pain, I remember the day when I went to the hospital and I was in so much pain, and just the idea of me going back to that day, it's heartbreaking for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? That becomes, right, the beginning of a stress reaction, right? Like every time I think about it, I'm stressed, right? What happens when that happens on a regular basis? Several times a day, several times an hour, right? Well, your body's going to shut down because all the energy that you have to heal and to focus on other parts of taking good care of yourself, like eating appropriately, drinking your water, exercising, right? You're paralyzed, right? And that's one of the many trauma reactions that we have, right? We either freeze, we either go on fight, right? We're always angry. We lose connections with others, which leads to a lot of the mental health pieces, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it takes a toll in the body because you're always stressed. When we are
Mm-hmm.
stressed, your muscles tense, and our capabilities, our basic capabilities, they freeze. So this is a very simplistic answer to a very complex question, so for the lack of time. But I hope it answered. And if not, I'll be help. I mean, I'll be glad to add more information to it.
Well, I think now that we've kind of dug into, how these two factors can kind of exacerbate each other, um, we want to start looking at solutions and what people with chronic illness can do to better manage their mental health and vice versa. So,
Yeah.
what are some practical ways that people, especially those who have a chronic illness, can kind of take care of their physical and mental health at the same time, just how they build their routine?
Oof, that's a good one. So when we come to practical things, is number one, and I know that people talk about this a lot um, in media, is you're not your trauma, you're not your disease, right? I have diabetes, I'm not diabetic,
Mm,
right? So that separation, even though it's been like grilled now, drilled in all of us, it's there's something to it, right?
hmm
Detaching yourself um from this condition, right? And what I said before, let the process of start the grieving, right? To say, okay, let's I have this diagnosis, nothing stopped me because I'm gonna follow all my dreams. Yes, that's beautiful, and something happened to you. In order to heal our trauma, which it can sometimes chronic conditions can be traumatic, right? We have to see it, right? There's nothing more healing um, for someone struggling with a traumatic event when they're not seen. When someone says, "Oh, you were sexually abused," oh, I don't believe you. Are you sure?
hmm
Right? Are you sure you're in pain? Right? What your body's gonna do? You're gonna scream louder. You're gonna say, "No, no, no, no! Look, yes, this is what happened to me." Right? So the first part for us, it's seeing that about ourselves first, and it's a process, right? It's not like, I'm gonna do this because I saw it in this webinar today. And start finding times and finding support to help us get there, right?
hmm
Um, Managing also specific information. The more you know about your condition, the more power you're going to have over that, right? So psychoeducation, CBT, it's one of the main ones, main modalities used to help us do that. Mainly because, well, number one, it's the modality where more the mental health therapists use the most. So it's the one that research based, we have more data. But there's other modalities that are also extremely, extremely helpful that I wanted to talk about today too. So psychoeducation about the pain is essential, right? It helps us when we start grounding ourselves, right? Wait, the pain is so much, where am I? What can I do can I get a bit of ice? Can I have a bit of water? Can
hmm
I let me smell something, right? Start with simple, basic things because our brain, it's on a primal, right? The polyvagal theory talks about using like the fist to show your brain, right? And when we're in the primal part of the brain, which I'm not going to go into details right now, but just to spark curiosity, um, you are in your animal face. There's no words for this. So let's avoid the words for a minute, right? When we are in pain and when we are struggling with a flare up or I feel like I'm going to have a seizure, or I feel like I'm going to have a low episode. So this is very important. One thing that is helpful for many people is the cognitive triangle, right? The way I think about something is gonna affect the way I feel, and and I'm gonna do a different action, right?
mm
So finding helpful thoughts, it's helpful for many people. What we have to keep in mind is where we are in this brain piece, right? Because if we are here in the primal, the thoughts are not going to be helpful, or us explaining to another person what we need. But when we are in a space of thought, because the intensity of the pain usually comes and goes, when we find a spot of, okay, I feel a little bit better. Let me think about this for a little bit.
hmm
Go ahead and go for it. Don't don't underestimate the power of nature, right? When individuals cannot give us the comfort that we need, or we don't feel understood, or we feel unseen, nature is there. The sun is there regardless. The wind is there regardless. Your dog, your cat, like find other sources of comfort and connection.
hmm
Um, one of the things when we are not in that primitive brain is the journaling piece. So you can start rescuing a little bit who you are beyond your pain, who you are beyond your diagnosis. You're when we say you're way more than that, yes. How do we find play? You're still a person. And that's the same thing I tell individuals trying to support their family members is that person that you love, it's still there. There's the change, but the core of who they are, it's still there. What are the values that you lost because of this diagnosis? How I want to rescue them,
Mm-hmm.
right? For example, there's this very basic thing, which is singing, right? A heart attack survivor, right? And when I had my heart attack, one of the things that I used to do to reduce the stress during moments of stress was singing.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that after the heart attack, I couldn't sing. Right? I couldn't sing in the car after work, and that was so devastating. Right? Like I wanted to, and I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which, by the way, for those survivors as well, for women, the way a heart attack affects them, it's with the shortness of breath instead of the chest pain. So all of these things, that's the reason it's so important to know about your condition and how it's affecting you. Um, time, one technique that is also used is time-based pacing. We feel a lot of guilt because we cannot do the same things that we used to do before. So whenever
Mm-hmm.
we feel great, we try to, I need to do it now before I feel sick again, right? And it seems logical to a certain extent. Um, However, it's important to pace ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that it's going to exacerbate. So, finding that balance, one thing that I recommend some people is to use Pomodoro. It's an app that helps you like time yourself. Like, I have a paper due, like for those who are college students, and I had a seizure. Um, and how I do this in a way that I feel like I'm making some kind of progress, but probably not meeting the deadline, but closer to the deadline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that reduces the stress and the mental block, and you can do a little bit at a time. Pomodoro pushes you to go 5 minutes, do what you can in 5 minutes and take a break. 5 minutes. Do 10 minutes, then take a 10-minute break.
Mm-hmm.
And it paces you. Um, and the importance of the installment of hope, right? Because if we lose hope, as someone with a diagnosis, we are going to stop caring going to the doctor. We're going to stop caring about the medications that we need to take, and taking care of our bodies. So that installment of health is very important. Another thing that a lot of people can explore beyond CBT, right? It's EMDR, right? Especially
Mm-hmm.
for chronic conditions like fibromyalgia, migraines, and pain. um, the pathways of the brain where the memory of that painful situation, that painful moment, or what, or whichever part of your body it's in pain, it's connected to an emotional dimension, right? It's connected, right? I feel scared every time I feel angry when I feel this pain. So it can feel like you're having a flashback. Not all the time that you have pain, it means that there's something wrong with your body. And that's the reason EMDR is interesting because it chronic pain can look a lot um like PTSD. You're having a pain flashback instead of an actual pain or alert from your body, right? It's like when we hear an alarm and after a certain minutes we start listening to it. So that's a little bit of the connection. So EMDR can be very helpful in those cases. And to ask yourself, instead of how I feel, because in pain or in a seizure or a low sugar episode, we have no clue of what words we have. Um, Once we get into thought, how can I get out of this dangerous situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Use more how instead of why. right? I I also want to add into whatever it's going on in the body, experiential therapeutic models are extremely helpful as well if we're thinking about that primal piece. So
Hmm.
um doing acupuncture, yoga, what they call somatic workouts now that you have tons of apps now with everything somatic, right? Listen to those, explore those with your therapist, with your physical medical provider, sorry, and to focus on how I can increase my functioning, right? Um, and focusing on the pieces that we can still do. Because believe it or not, for those that don't have a chronic condition, they say, how this person can be so happy. I hear that all the time. Like, how can you be so smiley?
Hmm.
All the things that have happened to you, like, I'm pretty happy with my life because we adapt. We're adaptable creatures. And the more support we have, the easier it is for us to adapt.
Hmm.
Does it mean that you're never gonna have suffering and you don't have self-doubt and shame? Absolutely not. We have all the same feelings of guilt and shame related to it. And one thing that it's and I kind of added at the end for a specific reason, it's DBT. It's very important, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And I'm going to go very quick into dialectical because the dialectical means that two opposite things can coexist. Two opposite ideas can coexist in one statement. For example, um, I had a low sugar episode and I'm happy because that means that my medication is working, that the insulin is working, right? And you say,
Hmm.
well, how can you be happy about that, right? So this is just an example of a very big concept, right? We can still find pieces of joy and pieces of playfulness and pieces of hope within the pain or within the lack of functionality. Um, so radical acceptance, it's a very important concept that I always invite everyone to explore. It's one of the hardest concepts to explore. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna go also say that. Radical acceptance is not accepting for because of accepting. You don't have to like what is happening to you. Um, we accept things for how they are. This is my situation. The more I fight against it, the more I deny that I have this condition, the more damage I'm doing to myself
Hmm.
in my own recovery. Because then I don't use my insulin, or the one person with epilepsy don't take their medications because, I'm angry, I'm in denial. So
Hmm.
that is very important. Checking the facts is very important too. Especially when we have when our condition is exacerbating. Um, how can we check those facts? Like I know the doctor said this, but I start making the story in my head, like, oh, I know he's saying that, but I know it's gonna be way worse, right? All these distortions, right, to keep us in check and to make that connection with your family members too. Which is important, using those somatic pieces. Um, and to allow the people who love you also go into that.
Hmm.
When we talk about, for example, which it might be the next piece, right? How can others can help us
Exactly.
when we are in a space like this, right? There's so much I can say about this, but I think the first piece is allowing allowing the people who you love also grieve
Mm.
and have that pain with you, because I still don't know anyone who's been diagnosed who's not concerned about how their mother feel, or their husband or their wife or their children, right? Oh, but I have this, but what breaks me the most is to see my children cry when I'm in pain, or
Hmm.
when I'm troubling, or when I have an episode. Um, and so we're so focused, which is beautiful, right? It means that we care about the people we love. It means that we want their well-being as much as we want ours, right? Um, So one thing that is very helpful is to say, I understand why you feel angry. I understand why you feel sad that this is happening to me. I'm also sad. Instead of everyone trying to put their best faces, which
Mm-hmm.
is it's going to be necessary too. Don't get me wrong. We also need spaces where, okay, I am your caregiver at this point, but I'm going to stay regulated, right? For the caregiver is not about you. Is
Yeah.
let the person, it's their suffering, and accepting that no matter how much we want the person to not be suffering, we have no control over that.
Mm-hmm.
That radical acceptance is very important there, right? And painful. Um, Also the pieces of the and the fixing part and the toxic positivity. And I'm going to be very
Yes.
careful with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everything is going to be okay. There's nothing I will love more than everything will be okay, but we have no control on how things are going to go, right? You'll get through this. You, you, are you sure that this is what you're feeling?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and fake it till you make it. Oh, that's one of the greatest hits. Fake it till you make it, right? So sometimes less is better, and this is one of those. I'm sorry that sounds, just to give an alternative. I'm sorry that this is difficult. I don't know what to say. I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? How can we help this person in practical ways? Here, just sometimes touch. Sometimes we underestimate the can I grab your hand? And I can sit here with you. You want me to watch a show with you? You want some water? Oh, I'll get that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Ask them what they need, listen to what they need. Sometimes the person doesn't want to be served also, right? So there's depending on the, sometimes they feel like, no, don't treat me like I'm
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to treat like you're my servant. You're not my servant. I want to feel useful and I want to push myself, right? Allow the person tell you and believe them. Believe them when they say, I want to do it or I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to the person with the diagnosis to say, okay, I'm overextending myself. Unsolicited advice. You won't believe what I saw on TikTok the other day, that it was so helpful for someone with your condition. I know it comes from a beautiful place. However, ask the person if they want suggestions. Ask the person if that's what they need or they just need to vent, right? Allowing those spaces. Um, Including them. If you know that the person you love has a chronic condition that can go out of the house often, how about you go to their house? Excluding them for the activities that you all used to do before because, oh, I'm not going to invite her or invite him because I know they're going to say no. Because they're going to say that they feel bad. And I don't want them to feel bad saying to cancel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, yes, it happens. We feel bad of canceling. And everyone assuming responsibility for their emotions is key, right?
Yeah.
We're holding space together but separate. Um, and one last piece because it's not last piece, but it's one of them that it's important that I see a lot in therapy in my sessions is the religious pieces, right? Um, and I'm gonna be very careful when I dive into this one because this another one. This is another one that requires one on its own. Also ask the person where they are in their beliefs and their spirituality because it creates a lot of anger. If I'm a very devoted Catholic or Methodist and I believe that God is going to help me through my condition, right? And it's not happening, a lot of people feel angry. I feel
Mm-hmm.
angry at God, right? The same way we grieve when someone dies, right? I feel angry that this person had to die, right? And so being very careful with that, trying not to shame them, and going to the religious preaching because the person is angry is going to be very important as well. These are all pieces that are very complex, and at the same time, spirituality can be a wonderful um, protective factor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for because it creates community as well. Um, so one thing that it's important, focusing a little bit on the EMDR of detaching the condition from the person, is I am angry at, for example, I am angry at arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. Not angry at you. When you see me angry when I'm doing these things for you because you cannot move, I'm enraged at your condition. So let's be enraged together. And let's be angry at the condition and not at the person.
Hmm.
Because no one chooses to have this diagnosis.
Yeah. I'm going to get to a couple of our audience questions here real quick. Um, one is, and this might require a little extra time, but one of them is how do you deal with chronic fatigue and paranoid schizophrenia combined together?
This one is interesting. This definitely requires one in itself. With schizophrenia, the pieces that are interesting, and this is a piece that I had it on my notes, but we didn't have enough time to go. It's the medication part, right?
Hmm.
A lot of the medication that it's given to individuals with that diagnosis, it gives you so much fatigue, right? So we go into the pieces that we can do, right?
Hmm.
And this is something that it needs to be an individualized plan of how the person can do that. So anything that focuses on the senses is going to be important, but also considering what are the activation items that that triggers the paranoid pieces in the schizophrenia, right? Um, for example, noises, right? What that noise is, right? If it's auditory, um, what kind of noises I can control my environment. Because if I can control the noises in my environment a little bit, then I'm not so exhausted and that hyper awareness of what that noise means. And I'm going very, very simplistic for a
Hmm.
very complex question, but that is a great question, and I'll be happy to send additional information. Um, Later on. But that's a great one.
Yeah, and this question might be similar because it's a little specific.
Hmm.
With regard to living with chronic GI symptoms and
Hmm.
psychological stress being one of the triggers for those symptoms,
Hmm.
do you
Yes.
have thoughts on effective psychological approaches to managing some of those symptoms?
Yeah, so for that one, it's interesting because our emotions, the stomach is the central station of our emotions, even though
Hmm.
we think it's the heart. But the stomach, it's where the emotions flare up for good or for bad, right? And having an open conversation with those around you is going to be important because it comes with a lot of shame, right?
Hmm.
There's so much shame about our body functions on a regular, right? One of the things that I have done with some of my clients with that kind, with I have one that it's has Crohn's disease. Um, it's the use of humor, right?
Mm.
She recently had a surgery, so she's always burping. And I'm going to use that example because it's a simple one. But the constant burping, and I'll be like, I'm gonna drink a soda and I'm gonna go ahead and burp with you, and we're gonna have a burping. So it becomes something that is funny,
Mm.
right, about the condition, so we can reframe a little bit the shame around what our body's doing that we have no control over, right?
Hmm.
So I definitely encourage everyone to do, especially polyvagal related somatic kind of therapy for individuals struggling with those kind of diagnoses that are more related to the GI.
Yeah. Um, and we've got some other, what we've got one more, so I'll take it real quick. What if you have several chronic pain disorders and are on the spectrum?
Mm, that one, I will say start with occupational therapy, because the sensitivity when someone is on the spectrum, um, it's definitely something that you have to take in a very concrete ways,
Hmm.
right? And there's a few websites where, especially if it's, I don't know if it's an adult that we're talking about or child, depends. If we're talking about an adult, there is a full guide that they do for individuals in the spectrum with chronic conditions throughout the developmental life, like with dating, for example. We
Mm.
kind of now we have this show, right, Dating on the Spectrum, where we normalize this a lot more. But I'm saying these pieces because that's a very broad question.
Hmm.
To start with, the sensations are going to feel louder. Some individuals in the spectrum might have stress-induced seizures because the stimulus is so potent when they're in pain. So all the everything might feel louder. So I'm just gonna start by validating that with someone with high sensitivities. Um, yeah, I'm gonna keep it there because
Hmm.
I know that we're close, but that will be I can send additional resources for the person with that question.
Great. And that's a great segue to saying that if you registered for this, whether you were able to attend live or not, if you registered, we'll be sending out any additional resources that Melissa has to share, as well as this recording and a feedback survey. So hopefully that will help. We can also just send other ways that you might be able to find more resources. And as always, if you want NAMI North Carolina's help navigating any of these issues or helping you find therapists in your area who might be able to talk with you about this sort of thing, you can contact our helpline, and I've just put that information in the chat. So you can contact us, and one of our trained volunteers can help you find somebody in your area who you might be able to speak with. Um, Also, keep an eye out for our next NAMI at Noon webinar, which is actually going to be next week, where we're talking about Superwoman syndrome and the pressure that women face to do it all and have it all, regardless of the toll that that takes on them. And that is strong enough for every woman, regardless as to whether you have a chronic illness or not. But we're going to be talking about that with Dr. Renee Manet. Um, but at this moment, I just really want to thank Melissa for sharing her time and expertise with us. This is an important conversation that obviously we could have for the next 3 hours. We won't do that to y'all today, but please feel free to reach out to us or follow up with the resources that we will send later on in the week. And Melissa, just thank you again. We appreciate your time.
Thank you all for joining me today.
All right, we hope to see you all at our next NAMI at Noon webinar, and take care, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Amy.